adventures of Math Girl. With the help of Pocket Ronnie, you also can become a trusty sidekick of Math Girl, like Kid Calculus and the Daring Derivative. Okay, we're going to be doing lines and graphing. This really should be a review from Algebra 1, so I'm going to go through this pretty quick. So, the general equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. This is called slope-intercept form. The reason it's in slope-intercept form is because you can tell when an equation is in this format, you know what the slope is and the y-intercept. M represents the slope. The number in front of your x represents the slope. Slope equals rise over run. Rise is your y values on a graph, run is your x values. B represents your y-intercept. The y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. So slope-intercept form is y on one side and everything else on the other side. Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. When your equation is in standard form, it will be ax plus by equals c, and a and b are coefficients in front of your x and y terms. Basically, standard form is x and y on one side of the equal sign and everything else on the other, all your whole numbers. The one thing about standard form is that there are no fractions in standard form. So that is standard form. This is, I'll usually say SI, slope-intercept form. Okay, we're looking at 20D 1 through 2. The problem actually says estimate M, which M represents the slope, and it also says estimate B, which is the y-intercept. Okay, the key word is estimate. Anytime you're graphing, it's usually an estimation. So in a minute, we'll actually be calculating the slope and the y-intercept. So we have a line here. The one thing that I wanted to say is that this line, if I drew a little man on the very far left of my line, if I drew a little man here, he would be skiing down the slope. When you're skiing down, that would be a negative slope. So I can see my slope should be a negative number. If I had a line that looks something like that, and I drew a little man on the very far left, because we read from left to right, then my man would be climbing up the hill. Climbing up is a positive slope. So if we go back to this line here, the green line, the y-intercept. Y-intercept is where does the line cross the y-axis. So if this right here crosses at this point right here, which is at positive 2, counting in the y direction, 1, 2. So my y-intercept, which is b, is a positive 2. And then estimating the slope. How you estimate the slope is you're going to draw a right triangle. You look for somewhere where it crosses at an exact crosshairs that you can make a point. I can make a point right there. I'm going to make my triangle bigger. Then I could, there it crosses, my line crosses exact crosshairs at that point as well. So I can make a right triangle, and then you count your rise and your run. Because remember, slope is rise over run. So I need to start at one point and travel to the other point. So if I start at this point here and go down and then travel to the right, in your y direction, going up is positive, going down is negative. So if I start at this point and I travel down and I count my lines, I don't count the spaces. I start at this line, then I go to the next line. 1, 2, 3. So I travel down -3. That would be my rise. And then my run, going to the right on a graph, is positive in my x direction, and going to the left is negative. So if I start here and then I count the lines, 1, 2, 3, I traveled in a positive 3 direction. A -3 divided by a positive 3 is a -1. So my slope is -1. My y-intercept is 2. They don't ask you to do this, but if I wanted to write an equation for that line in y equals mx plus b format, the general equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. Replace your m with your slope. Y equals -1x, and then my y-intercept is a positive 2. Of course, I could just say -x plus 2. That would be the slope-intercept form of that line. Okay, now we're going to practice changing these equations from slope-intercept form to standard form. So if you look at 20b-5, you have x plus 7y equals 14. That is an equation for a line, and it is in standard form to where x's and y's are on one side, whole numbers on the other side, and we are asked to put it in slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form is y on one side and everything else on the other side. So that means I need to move my x because I only want y on one side. So the x's go away, so on the left I still have 7y. I cannot combine x's and whole numbers, so I'll just write this as negative x plus 14. I only want y, which means I need to get rid of the 7, so I divide by 7. But if I divide this by 7, I divide every term by 7. So that means those 7's go away. Y equals, this is like a negative 1 right there. So I could write this as a negative 1/7 coefficient in front of my x. 14 divided by 7 is a positive 2. Positive 14 divided by positive 7 is positive 2. That is your slope-intercept form for that equation. You can have fractions in slope-intercept form. You cannot have fractions in standard form. Alright, let's look at 20b-7. Again, they're saying put this in slope-intercept form. This is not quite standard form because there's a fraction. But to put it in slope-intercept form, we want y on one side and everything else on the other side. Okay, so we can either go through the process of getting rid of the fractions. I probably would get rid of the fractions to start with. It's usually easier. You could work it with the fractions if you wanted to. But if I get rid of my fractions, then I need to multiply everything by 3 to get rid of this denominator. So multiply that by 3, that by 3, and that by 3. Those would cancel, and I would have 1x plus 6y equals 6. Now, I'm trying to get y on one side and everything else on the other side, so I need to get rid of my x. I cannot combine x's and whole numbers, so I can just write it like this. Now I need to get rid of my 6 because I only want y on that side. So if I divide this by 6, I have to divide everything by 6. And this is like a 1 there, so I can write this as a negative 1/6 coefficient. 6 divided by 6 is 1, not 0. So that would be in slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form, y on one side, everything else on the other side. And you can see this is my slope, the number before your x, and this is my y-intercept. They call it slope-intercept form because you can tell what your slope is, negative 1/6. You can tell what your y-intercept is, positive 1. Alright, now let's look at 20b number 8. We're given this equation in slope-intercept form, and now we want it in standard form. What does standard form mean? Standard form means x and y on the left, or on the same side, and whole numbers on the other side. So if I need to get x's and y's together, it means I need to move this over here with the y. So I need to subtract 5x to both sides. I cannot combine x's and y's, so I'll leave it as negative 5x plus y equals negative 4. This is correct. Some books don't like having a negative in front of your x term, so to get rid of this negative, you basically multiply everything by a negative 1, because a negative 1 times a negative 5 would give me a positive 5. So if you're going to divide or multiply this by negative 1, you multiply everything by negative 1. So then you could have, it basically changes the sign of everything. So either one of these, this is okay form or this is okay form. I'm just showing you because the book will probably have this, but this is okay as well. Neither one is wrong. You can just see that the sign changed. Every sign changed. That was a negative, it became a positive. This was a positive, it became a negative. This was a negative, it became a positive. Okay, let's look at 20b-6. We want to put this in standard form. Standard form is x's and y's on one side, whole numbers on the other, and there are no fractions in standard form. So since I have a fraction right here, I recognize I need to get rid of the fraction. In order to get rid of that denominator of 3, I have to multiply everything by a 3, every term. So here those 3's cancel, and I'm left with 3y equals 2x plus 18. Well, standard form is x's and y's on the same side, so I need to get my x's and y's on the same side. I can't combine x's and y's, so I can just write it as negative 2x plus 3y equals 18. Again, this is okay. But the book also may have it where there's not a negative in front of your x term, meaning you just multiply everything by -1, all your signs change. So it could also be this, 2x minus 3y equals -18. These both are the same equation, just all the signs have changed. Okay, we're looking at 20D 3 through 6. You're given a slope of -4/3 and it says that the line goes through the point 3, 2. We are asked to find the y-intercept and then put the equation in slope-intercept form, standard form, and then to graph it. Alright? Yes, you could graph this with the information that they have given you here. You could go graph this point, plot the point, and then count your slope. Slope is rise over run. So this would be going down 4, going to the right 3. But instead of doing that, we're going to go through all the calculations and then we're going to graph the equation of the line once we have the equation of the line. Okay? One thing to always recognize, this is a slope, then they give you a point. Every point they give you is an x and a y coordinate. Alright? Whenever they've given you a slope and a point, you always start with the general equation of a line of y equals mx plus b. So in all the information that they've given you a slope, then we were given a point, an x and a y value. So we can take the information that we were given and calculate b. This is a more exact way of calculating b than trying to graph and estimate b from the graph. This is an exact calculation. So we can take the information that we're given from our point, our x and y value. Our y value is 2. So we can substitute 2 in for y. Then we put our slope in, -4/3 times our x value. Our x value is 3 from our point, plus b. Remember, you can turn any number into a fraction by putting it over 1. So this is a fraction times a fraction. So you multiply fractions. Well, you can see that your numerator and denominator is going to cancel. So that 3 and 3 is going to cancel. But I also want to work it to where, let's just say we didn't, well, you can also get rid of your fractions. Anytime you have an equation like this, you can always multiply through by your denominator to get rid of your fractions. Okay, so here, our numerator and denominator cancels and you end up with -4 over 1. -4 divided by a +1 is just a -4. So that would be -4 plus b. Now we're solving for b, so we add 4 to the other side. So b equals 6. That's one of our answers, okay? So we know that our y-intercept is a +6. We know our slope is a -4/3. Now we can write an equation for the line. You go back to your general equation of y equals mx plus b. Now we're going to substitute in our slope and our y-intercept to write an equation. So y equals -4/3 was our slope. We're not putting anything for y and x. When we write slope-intercept form, we want our x's and y's still in there. And then our y-intercept was a +6. That is the slope-intercept form of our equation. Now we are wanting to put it in standard form. So to put it in standard form, remember standard form is x's and y's on the same side, whole numbers on the other side, but there are no fractions in standard form. So we need to get rid of this fraction. So since we want to get rid of the 3, we multiply everything by a 3 for the denominator to go away. So this means that we would have 3y, that cancels, -4x, don't lose your negative sign, plus 18. Well, we want to get x's and y's on the same side, so we want to move our 4x over with our -4x over with our 3y. So you don't combine x's and y's, and in standard form, your x is generally written first. And so that would be our equation in standard form. Okay, so it asks us to graph the equation. So remember, our equation was y equals -4/3 x plus 6. You can graph any equation as long as it's in slope-intercept form, because in slope-intercept form, we know our slope. Our slope is -4/3 and our y-intercept is 6. Whenever you are given the slope-intercept form and you're going to graph your line, you always graph your y-intercept first. Y-intercept means where does it cross the y-axis? We cross the y-axis at a +6. So start from the origin and then count up, because it's positive, count up 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have a point there. It only takes 2 points to draw a line. So I have a point at my y-intercept. From my y-intercept, I can count my slope. My slope is -4/3. Slope is rise over run. I generally count my rise first. So start from my y-intercept, and then my rise is -4. That means -4 means go down, and rise is the y direction. So it means go down 4. So count down 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then my run is 3, a +3, so that's to the right. 1, 2, 3. And then I can make another point there. So again, from your y-intercept, you count your rise and your run. Go down 4, over to the right 3, and that's your second point. And from that, you can draw your line. Mine's not very straight. You guys can use a straight edge. So this line represents the equation of y equals -4/3 x plus 6. And if you went back to your original problem, it said that it passes through the point 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That right there is the point 3, 2. So it does pass through the point that it tells us in the original problem. Okay, we're looking at 20B number 12. On this problem, they give us 2 points, and they're asking us to find the slope. Now, if you're given 2 points, yes, you can plot these on a graph, and then you can figure out your slope by the graph. But they're not asking us to do that. They're asking us to use the formula for slope. So anytime you can calculate, it's always going to be more exact than graphing. So when you are given 2 points, you can find the slope, because slope is rise over run. Your rise is your y's, your y values over your x's. So basically, when you are graphing it and doing it, what you are doing is you're finding the difference of your y values over the difference of your x values. So you can do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So basically what we are doing is we are going to label these points as point 1 and point 2. It doesn't matter which one you want to choose to be point 1. I'm just going to call this one point 1 since it's first. So this one's going to be point 1, which means that is an x value, that is a y value. That's x value for point 1, that's my y value for point 1. So I'm using subscripts just as a label. Remember, the subscripts are nothing to do with the calculation, it's just a label. So this is my x value for point 1, this is my y value for point 1. So then I'll label this one point 2, which means this is my x value for point 2, and that's my y value for point 2. So these are my x and y values for point 2. These are my x and y values for point 1. It's really important when you do this formula, you start with the same point every time. If I'm going to take my second value minus my first value, then in the denominator it needs to be the second value minus the first value. Alright? So it's very important not to mix them up. In other words, you don't say y2 minus y1 all over x1 minus x2. You can't do that. These numbers have to be the same. Second value, start with the second value, start with the second value. So you cannot do that. That will not work. Alright? So if we go back to our formula for our slope, and we're going to use this. y2 minus y1, we're basically taking the difference of our y's over the difference of our x's. So my y2 value, that's 0.2, is -4. Minus, the formula is a minus sign. It's important to keep up with negatives. The formula already has a minus sign. That's that minus sign. Now my y value for 0.1 is 3. All over my x value from 0.2, that's this one right here, 1. Minus, the formula is a minus. My x value for 0.1 is a -5. It's very important to keep up with your negatives. This was my second value from x minus the first value. Keep up with your negatives. When you do minus a negative, what happens? Becomes a positive. So now, -4 minus 3. I'm in debt 4. I'm in debt 3 more. That would be -7. And then my denominator, after I had minus a negative and adding, +6. So my slope for this problem is -7/6. Generally, we keep slopes in improper fractions. Don't change slopes into a mixed number, so leave it just like that. Okay, now we're looking at 20D, 7 through 10. They've given you 2 points, and after they've given you 2 points, they ask you to find the slope, calculate the slope, calculate the y-intercept. Now put an equation in slope-intercept form, then put your equation in standard form, then they want you to graph it. Alright? Graphing was the last thing they asked you to do, and so therefore I'm not going to find any of my answers by graphing, because graphing is generally an estimate. I am going to find all of these answers by calculations. Alright? So remember, they've given you a 0.1 and a 0.2. So when you're determining the slope, you can do the difference of your y's over the difference of your x's. So these are each an x and y value. So you just need to determine which one do you want to call 0.1 and which one do you want to call 0.2. Alright? We'll just call this first one 0.1 and we'll call the second one 0.2. So when you're finding the slope or calculating the slope, you're using your formula of the difference of your y's, which I start with 0.2, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Substituting in those numbers, my y value from 0.2 is 4. I generally recommend writing x and y over these numbers, okay? All points are in xy coordinate format. If you write your xy's up here, it will help you keep track of which numbers go where, okay? So I want my y value from 0.2, which is this one, 4. The formula is a minus sign. My y value from 0.1 is a 2. Now my x values. 0.2 is negative 3 minus 0.1 is a 1. Keep up with your signs. 4 minus 2 is 2. I'm in debt 3. I'm in debt 1 more, so I'm in debt 4. Now reduce that. A 2/4 reduces down to 1/2. And a positive divided by a negative is a negative. It doesn't really matter where I put my negative sign. I can move it up to the numerator and that's still a negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. So generally, sometimes you'll see the negative just right in front of the fraction like that. That's okay too. So now we know my slope is a negative 1/2. Then we need to calculate the y-intercept. So once you know the slope, and you have a point, which you have 2 points to pick from, you can put all your information back into y equals mx plus b, because I know the slope and then I know an x and a y from one of my points. You can pick either point. I'm going to pick 0.1 because there are no negatives. So there are not any negatives. I might have misspoke with grammar. Okay, so my y value is 2. My slope, I just calculated that, was negative 1/2 times my x value, which is 1 plus b. A negative 1/2 times 1, if this was any number other than 1, remember I can turn it into a fraction. So basically 2 equals negative 1/2 plus b. Okay, I'm trying to solve for b, so I need to add 1/2 to the other side. So I have 2 equals negative 1/2 plus b. Am I getting this in the shot? So adding 1/2 to the other side. So again, you can either turn your whole number 2 into a fraction and make common denominators, or 2 plus 1/2 is b equals 2 1/2. But I'm going to change that into an improper fraction. 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5, so it's the same thing as 5/2. So b equals 5/2. Now they asked to write the equation in slope-intercept form. Remember, slope-intercept form is y on one side, everything else on the other. Slope-intercept form is to where we can see the slope and the y-intercept. So y equals, now we replace m with negative 1/2 x, and then my y-intercept was a positive 5/2. So that's my slope-intercept form. Now I need to put it in standard form. Standard form means there are no fractions in standard form, and x and y is on the same side. Both of my denominators are 2, so if I multiply everything by a 2, then all my fractions will go away. That will cancel, That will cancel. So over here, I have left a 2y equals, don't lose your negative sign, that would be negative 1x, or you can just write negative x, plus 5. Move my x over to be with my y. So we have x plus 2y equals 5, and that would be your equation in standard form. Okay, now we need to graph this equation. So our slope-intercept equation was y equals negative 1/2 plus 5/2. We always want to graph from the slope-intercept equation because I can see the slope and I can see what my y-intercept is. So anytime you have the equation, you graph the y-intercept first. Okay, so my y-intercept is 5/2. Whenever you're graphing, you do want to change improper fractions into a mixed number to be able to graph it. Because if I told you graph 5/2, we wouldn't know where that is on the graph. But if we change 5/2 into a mixed number, that's 2.5. I do know where that's at on the graph. It's positive. So I start at the origin, and since it's positive, I'm going to count up 2.5 lines. 1, 2, and then go up half of a line. This is why graphing is an estimate. I am just estimating where halfway is in between, okay? So I put a point there for my y-intercept. Once you're at your y-intercept, you can count your slope. My slope was m equals negative 1/2. I generally put my negative with the numerator. Slope is rise over run. So from my y-intercept, I do my rise first. So my rise is negative 1, which means go down. Go down 1 whole space. So if I'm halfway in between these two lines, I've got to go down to the halfway point of the next lines. Okay, so I'm at the halfway point. I'm not on a exact line, I'm just estimating. Then my run is a positive 2, which means I go over to the right 2. 1, 2 lines. So therefore my point is going to be at my halfway spot. So this right there would be the line. I only need 2 points to graph a line. So therefore this would be the line of y equals negative 1/2 x plus 5/2.